but it still can be stressful. So we recognize that, and we're here to support you. We are going to be looking at preparing, preventing, and responding, because all three of those words are verbs that are used in this leveraging process. And how do we use the funds? How do we report them out? Next slide, please. So the goal of this session that I'm doing is to show you the national and Montana allocations, the significance of the formula that was used to do that allocation, because that allocation does hit, the formula used does hit at how other funds can be allocated to you. We're going to talk about spending campaigns, and we're going to talk about the Montana and others as we pivot to embrace the online and innovation that has occurred throughout our state. And lastly, we'll talk about the system of support, that role and responsibility of advocate and auditor. Again, my name is Wendy Fons, and I'm the director of ESSER and EANS. You'll see phone numbers and contacts if you haven't already had communication with me, that will also be at the end. Next slide. So when we look at ESSER as a state and also at a national level, these are two maps that I pulled together for you. First of all, if you notice the ESSER 1, and I apologize for the little bit of overlap there, but ESSER 1 expires this year, so in 2022. ESSER 2, or CRISA, expires in 2023, and ESSER 3, or ARP, expires in 2024. So think of the Roman numerals as an expiration date 1 year out. When you look at the amount of money that was given to the United States for these ESSER funds, these emergency COVID funds in education, it's $189.5 billion. So a huge amount of money was spread over the United States for the educational institutions. And then on the right-hand side, you see sort of a map that shows by state how those allocations were made. All this information can be found on the COVID relief governmental site, but I sort of made a little table showing the colors. So the lighter colors that, like Montana is in, we received less than $1 billion. And then like Washington, the middle color was between 1 and 9 billion. And then California, or those darker colors, were receiving over 10 billion. So that kind of gives you an idea of, at a national level, how those funds were allocated. Next slide, please. So the way in which the allocations were made, and I think this is a very important thing to understand, is that they were based on Title I guidelines. So if a school district, and I'm giving a very high level on this, so if a school district only had 10 students that were appropriated Title I funding, then that school district would also have a proportionate number of ESSER funds allocated. So there's a direct link between Title I funding and the formula used for that funding, as there is for ESSER. So those two are pretty tightly connected together. What that also means is that the reporting that goes out for Title I also is a matter, or connects to, ESSER reporting. And so that's why some of you, when you looked at the data collection that occurred last spring, saw that some of the questions that were being asked on that were similar to Title I. So that same type of method for funding allocation is being used. The same types of questions are being asked of the ESSER funding. Then the second piece of funding that came in there was House Bill 632. 20% of the ESSER ARP funds were used to specifically address learning loss. So as the ESSER funds were being allocated, there were discussions at the legislative level saying, okay, we've got all these funds for education, but let's also allocate a specific amount. Let's flag it or set it aside specific to learning loss. Not that other parts of ESSER couldn't be used as well, but again, across the United States, they went, all right, we need to extend and expand the school day. Thus, let's look at after school, summer school enrichment program, those that target specifically Title I group students, and bring that in as a special allocation or a flagged allocation of the funding itself. And they designated 20%. That was a decision that was made there. Next slide. So when we look at how we've done our spending, this is, I think, also important to look at. And the portion on the left, the table is showing as of June 30th, this is the amount of money that's been spent in each one of those pockets. So CARES is ESSER 1, Carissa, ESSER 2, ARP is ESSER 3. And I obviously didn't highlight all of them, but I kind of took those that are around us or similar in their allocation funding and showed where we are on that percentage of expenditure. These funds, once they are given to the state, are not able to be redistributed. So if we end up with districts not spending money in the CARES component, so the ESSER 1, if we haven't expended those by the deadline this year, then we do have to return those. And that's why I know some of you have been receiving calls from me or emails saying, you may have this amount of money still left. You may want to go ahead and allocate those now. So if you are in that situation, if you're in a situation where you've used your plans to identify with your stakeholders, this is how you want to spend the money. But for example, you couldn't get contractors to help with something, or maybe you had teacher retention issues and now you want to allocate those funds there. You can do that. So again, the amendment process in ESSER is very flexible, and it does allow you to use those ESSER funds right now in maybe a different way than you had initially anticipated. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us to try and bring that expenditure of ESSER 1s to a complete zero. Now, I say that, and I know in some districts it's hard because there's like a couple of districts who have $6 left. So that can be a little bit of a challenge, but let's try and work together to try and bring that to as close to 100% expenditure as we can within this next month. Any questions? I'm going to pause at both of the expenditure and allocations for just a second. I don't see any in the chat. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on. So when we look at ESSER funding, both at the national level and also at the state level, one of the words that's been used repeatedly is this innovate. So the money was really allocated to help us during a very emergency type situation. And if you think about a hospital that's dealing with a fire, you have people coming in and the mode of operation can't be the same that it was before. And so money is often given to help bridge over those new settings and to say, okay, we recognize things have to be done a little differently. It maybe will cost more. Maybe you need more staff. Maybe you need different programming tools. Let's move into that mode. And so that's part of what's happened. And we've got about 55 plus million students who are impacted by this. When you think of the students who were in school during the spring of 2020, I was actually in March, I was in Helena at a HOSA convention with students right when that COVID close down occurred. So we had about 400 kids affected at that immediate time. And of course, across our state, we've had a lot. Looking at how you address the learning loss, how you address returning to school, but also then after returning to school, how do you bridge into the next couple of years with the impact having occurred? So these innovative funds, these funds were allocated for that thought process, bringing together teams, leaders to try and innovatively do roundtable discussions and come up with programs, come up with solutions of how you can move forward. Schools have really focused on, and I think this has been interesting to see and really encouraging, on that high touch component, that piece of campaigns to get students back into the classroom, and maybe understanding that back into the classroom means a remote classroom, not necessarily an on-site classroom. So phone calls, text, and in person. I've had a couple of teachers indicate that during the last 2 years, they've had more contact with students than they have before, not so much in the classroom, but external to that they've bridged into some of these projects that students are doing at home, and that has been very effective. The other area that we've looked at a lot and started to use, and I apologize for the acronyms, you just can't fit them all on there, but the student information systems and the customer relation management systems. So the student information systems have jumped up in their capacity. So that's that Infinite Campus, I think Compass. There are a couple of other programs that are being used to help integrate the data that we're receiving on students, but also to be able to provide students more data and connect the parents in better. So Infinite Campus did a big push with helping parents understand how to use Infinite Campus, how to get in there and see syllabus that maybe a teacher's providing, homework assignments, early alerts that were going out, and then also these customer relationship programs that allow for profiling of students again to say, okay, I've got a student who's in 6 classes. I only teach one, but how can I help that student who may be failing English, even though I'm teaching another class? And sort of bridging some of those connecting points within the holistic component of the student. Also, again, looking at tutoring, social emotional help that can occur in the schools and outside, and really building upon a stronger overall support system for those students. In the programming focus, we've seen a lot of intensive academic intervention, and that's fed into this individual uh, tutoring type mode, online and in small groups. And then that's also continued as we've opened the schools up more, and it's sort of returning back to that normal. I hate using that word normal, but into that mode again. A lot of those intensive academic intervention tools and techniques are continuing through. And again, that's at the state level and at the national level. We've also started to look a lot at this college and career programming. Dual enrollment was something that during the pandemic could suddenly be used, especially in a online format. I had several students across the state of Montana who immediately jumped into a dual enrollment program that was created by Dawson Community College to allow medical technology, medical terminology class to be brought up from April to May. So right as the pandemic hit, students were able to be moved off to that program, and it was very successful. Summer career camps, like MedStart and others that occur throughout our state, are being utilized as well to try and do that bridging during what would otherwise be seen as a low time. It's actually a time to continue to engage students. So these ESSER funds have been used for those types of activities as well. And then the recruitment and retention to retain the valuable education workforce. Funds have been used significantly in that realm, both as stipends, as bonuses, as curriculum that's being purchased, particularly for a project that a teacher may want to do. So a lot of innovation around that. And the federal government has been very supportive in recognizing our labor shortages and helping to support ESSER funds being used in that. And then lastly, as a target, again, going back to that Title I funding and the connection between the group that is affected by Title I and also ESSER, we've really been focusing on the math and the reading and the connectivity that are needs to fill this critical gap time, to fill both the learning loss, but also where we are on the educational platform. So as we target some of those, the state of Montana is really trying to be innovative and targeted at the same time by doing things within that extended and expanded time frame, that 20% learning loss, the after school and summer enrichment time frame, and saying, how can we help to support school districts and our student population in the math area, in the reading area, in the how we connect in with our teachers throughout this otherwise seemingly non-academic time, but really bridging that as an overall educational component. So the funds, as you can see, are really used in many different ways throughout our state. It's used in many different capacities in other states as well. And it's a lot of funding that's still available. Next slide, please. So I did want to talk briefly about the system of support that's available to you. And I know that I've talked at some of the conferences about this advocate and auditor role that OPI plays. This is, I think, a very important part to understand. We do at OPI, and particularly the ESSER group, really does balance these two amongst each other. So we are there as your advocates to help you secure operationally, technically, and financially feasible solutions, both to help you generate those solutions, and also once you come up with those yourself, we're there to help you look at how can you operationalize that? How can you implement that solution with the technical constraints that you have? How can you make that feasible with ESSER funding, but maybe also braiding it into other funding that's available? At the same time, we also are there to be auditors to help you with templates and reports and that wonderful data collection that occurs in the spring, but to help you with those projects so that as an auditor function, you have the documentation that if you get audited, whether it's from the public coming in and saying, so how are you spending these ESSER funds? Or it's an auditor coming in and saying, where's the documentation that shows that 200,000 was spent on learning loss or was spent to purchase this copier? We're there to help you develop streamlined documentation so that that documentation is acceptable to the auditors and can also be used in the public to help promote what you're doing. So that same role as auditor, managing and helping to support you in the documentation, can also be used in the advocate role to help you secure feasible solutions for problems or challenges that you're facing now. The other role that we play as advocate is to help reduce the work effort by demonstrating how one task can be used in another task. And this is sort of one of my um, sort of focal points is I really like to see how one activity that we do where we spend our 5 hours a day can also be a benefit in other areas. And I think that's something that we can really work on by taking, again, whether it's a document we make saying, so we made this document for one part of ESSER, how can we use it in our Title I programming? How can we use it in our after school programming? How can we use it in our culinary arts program that maybe we're running? Where else can this work effort that we've been using and the products that we produce in this one place be used in other places? Maybe it's a flyer for an event that then is used not just for that event, but also put on your Facebook to be able to demonstrate to the public, this is how the ESSER funds were used. And so it's that tie-in. So we're trying to help with that tie-in to be your advocates to help use the ESSER funds in a way that isn't just targeted for one area, but can be more broadly used. And again, that also hits at our auditing piece of looking at monitoring and reporting on the grant compliance, because part of what the grant does require is that we engage our stakeholders. So being able to say to our public, the school teachers, the community members, the civic clubs that are out there, being able to bring them into the discussion of how the funds are being used and elicit their support in that is part of the compliance piece. And lastly, training. So training like we're doing today. So one of the kudos and tremendous thanks, I was talking about it right before we went live today, was to say to all of you, thank you so much for joining us today in this training effort and really for the effort that you put in that registration. I know sometimes it's hard to register it, you got to put in a bunch of information, but many of you answered that question of what is it you want to take away from this process today. And that really helps us. So please continue to tell us what you need when you need it. You can do that in emails, you can do it from phone calls, but these webinars and that collective process was very, very helpful today. So thank you so much for providing that information and encourage you to continue to do so. As we continue to work with the Department of Ed, we will be continuing to do these trainings on an ongoing basis once a month on Tuesday. And we will also have additional training. But basically, we're taking the information that the Department of Ed gives us or that different states are giving us and saying, here's an idea we have, and we're going to bring that back to you so that we can all share in the wealth of training that is available around these ESSER funding. Next slide, please. So the schedule today, as we continue, will be the next part of our slides will be the broadband overview, and we're going to have Victoria who will talk about what we are doing at a state level and how those funds, ESSER funds, are going to be used to help provide greater broadband access and just what is exactly that means. So she's going to go over some of that. We're going to talk about amendments and cash requests. So the amendments are that unique part of ESSER grant that allows you to go in and modify the plans that you've already made. And we're going to talk about reporting and data compliance and how that's going to start this fall. And then we'll have our third year of data collection occurring in the spring again. We'll talk about audit trails and reporting and the compliance of that. We have Dan Moody, our expert, will be talking about that and helping to support. We're then going to talk about navigating e-grants. So as much as sometimes I complain about e-grants, it is a pretty powerful system. It's just a matter of figuring out its little nuances. It's like a house that has 6 doors, but every single door has a different key, and you just have to know which key to use. So we're going to talk about that navigation. We're then going to talk about the impacts of how you can use ESSER funds to really impact in many different ways. We're going to do a Hall of Fame, which is going to be really nice. We have 3 districts, which will be talking about how they've used ESSER, maybe what challenges they have, and they'll be sharing that out with you. Those will be Glendive or Dawson County, and then also Superior and Great Falls. So they'll be addressing what they've used ESSER funds for, how they've benefited their community, and the challenges they've seen. And then in the afternoon, we will have some of these sessions repeated. So if you aren't able to attend the whole morning sessions, you can follow up in the afternoon with those. Next slide, please. So just again to share with you, you have a team of OPI support that's available to you. On our homepage, underneath the superintendent is a red button for ESSER. You're welcome to use that at any time. There's a tremendous amount of information there. And then on the right-hand side, I have our 3 team members, myself, Wendy Fawns, Rebecca Brown, who you'll meet throughout the sessions today. She's also probably already been in contact with you through the registration process, and Victoria Hilfer, who is also going to be talking to you about the broadband.